Hello, Michael. Welcome to the podcast with Casa Mia.
Hello, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, would you be able to start by telling us who you are and what your experience is and your background in relation to Casa Mia?
Okay. Michelle, firstly, I thought I might just go back a little bit because
Okay.
Casa Mia is a long journey.
Yes.
And, for us, every journey starts with a beginning. And my beginning actually started even before I was born. And it'll come evident when I start talking a little bit more about it. But, after the war, there was mass migration out of Italy. And I was one of those people that was fortunate enough to get on a big boat, and come over to Australia. Mm-hmm. But one of the things about the hometown where I was born is that there was a mass exodus after the war of over 200 people, and I was one of them. But we all ended up in Mariba, which is not far from where Casa Mia and Cairns actually is. Mm-hmm. But one of the things about Calabria in Italy at the time is that there was a close-knit community, and that sense of community was what we all brought over and created in Mariba. So I actually grew up in Mariba with a similar community that there was over in Italy. Mm-hmm. So when the name Casa Mia comes up, to me it conjures up those sort of images of those little country towns in Italy, hilltop towns where everybody knows everybody and everybody looks out for each other. So, and I think those sort of stories were very important for me as I was growing up to keep those stories alive. And one of the people in our hometown, a gentleman, Albert Avolia, actually wrote a book and documented all of those people that made that journey for a better life here in Australia.
Oh, wow.
And I'm in there, of course, as one of those. But moving on from that is that as I grew up in Mariba, we created our own community. We didn't have a lot of family up there. So it was really learning all those values about looking after each other and doing the right thing by your neighbour.
The village mindset.
Exactly. And for us, the family unit was really probably the most important part of our lives. And my father passed away at a younger age, unfortunately, but my mother and my mother-in-law, I married another Italian lady, of course, and not of course, but it just happened that way. I wasn't specifically looking out for something like that, but it just it worked out well for me because we both share the same values. And one of the things that we sort of discovered along the way as we were getting older is that as part of the community and having that feeling of welcomeness, food was really one of the most important parts of our lives, apart from looking out from each other in a sense to make food, not war. And food really is important in our lives, etc. And one of the things that we really wanted, apart from the journey of people that came over, was those values that they brought over and also the recipes that they came over. And for me, part of my journey was to try to get some of those recipes out of my mother and mother-in-law's heads and onto paper. So one of my journeys was to actually create a cookbook with all those recipes of that I grew up with.
Oh, wow.
And we use this every day. So that sense of community and belonging and lifestyle continues in me. And I'd like to think that through my journey from when I first came over here to now, all those things that I've carried with me all that time has sort of helped me in how I thought about Casa Mia. Now, a little bit of serendipity, but here's a photograph. Now, that little boy in the photograph there with the suspenders and the shorts, how could he have known that 60 years later I'd be sitting here with you after trying to create a new community which tries to emulate the community that he was in when he was a little boy, there like that. And that's the story that I think for me was really quite touching when Ross came to me and said, Michael, we'd like to do a retirement village. Are you interested? Of course, I'm very interested. At the time, my mother was frail and she ended up in a nursing home. Ross's mother also ended up in it. So we had a fair bit of connection between the two. Now, Ross's mother and my mother, both of the same sort of vintage.
Yes.
So I think that was important to understand what that age group were actually looking for when we created Casa Mia. So,
wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much for such a detailed
probably longer
explanation.
than what you imagined, but it sort of painted that sort of picture that Casa Mia is important to me.
Yes, no, absolutely. But just to reiterate, Michael Martino here is the lead architect on Casa Mia Living. So he has designed this beautiful village for us, heavily Italian inspired. Would you say Italian inspired?
I think we can sort of touch on that and say that, yes.
Touch on Italian inspired. So being Italian and having that village mindset in your upbringing, what or if any of those elements do you think you've brought into Casa Mia in terms of that community and that Italian essence?
I suppose the main thing is that every hilltop town in Italy has got a piazza.
Yes.
And that's the place where you sort of come out of your home, where you're doing your private things, your private cooking, but then to get that social interaction, you go to a meeting place.
That's
and
the gathering place, yeah.
Happens in the piazza. I don't know what the word piazza actually means, but to me it actually means it's a gathering place. It's a central place where you can be together and enjoy life. And it's not just a matter of just sitting there and talking. You are having a coffee, or you're playing cards, or playing bocce, or having a bite to eat. So it's all part of life. You have to get out of that mindset where you stay in your unit and that's where you live your life. Your life is outdoors. It's got to be with other people.
Oh, that's beautiful. So would you say then that community life that you experienced growing up, that was sort of your main driver in creating that piazza as a gathering place?
Absolutely.
For the
that
community?
Was the main driver. I mean, when you start off with a plan, you start off with a blank sheet of paper. And yes, you do have constraints of how big the site is and the orientation. And then obviously the commercialism comes into it, that you've got to fit X number of units, and this needs to be that big, that needs to be that big. But the key to Casa Mia really started off with that central piazza. It became a dot on the paper, and I knew that it had to be some sort of a circle. And a lot of, if you even look at St. Peter's Basilica out the front of the church, the actual piazza in front, it's got the cloister of it's actually a welcoming sort of thing like that. And that's what the circle sort of represents. It unites people. It's got a beginning and no end at the end of the day.
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful. And what about, obviously we're positioned in Gordonvale, in the heart of Gordonvale. Was that a factor as well for you to consider in terms of seamlessly integrating into that Gordonvale community and serene environment out there?
As I said, I grew up in Mariba, which is a very small town, and I believe that, from what I've read, is that Gordonvale had that similar sort of feeling in that it was close to Cairns, but it was far enough that it had its own little identity. And it too had a lot of Italians there, apart from Ross, of course, others.
Yes.
Well. So there was that connection between where I grew up and Ross grew up, and trying to get that same energy happening in Gordonvale that I experienced for over 60 years.
Yes, yes, and it's certainly a growing position now, isn't it, Gordonvale?
It certainly is.
A lot of growth out there. What sort of features or design elements do you think you've incorporated into Casa Mia to enhance the overall living experience for our residents?
Okay. The living part of it was actually two parts. There was obviously the interaction with the rest of the tenants, the rest of the residents in there, but there was also, when you do go back to your own unit, that you felt like you weren't just put in a stack of X number of units and you sort of closed in. So that's why all of the buildings at this stage are all single story. And the way we've positioned the buildings is that they create another courtyard between one building and the other building. And we didn't want them to looking straight into each other, so all the buildings are at these sort of funny, strange angles that the builder's going to curse us for. But at the end of the day, what it does create is that informality, because life is not just a straight line, it's got ins and outs and stuff. So I think how we live in those sort of spaces need to reflect that. So when you are in your unit, yes, you've got your privacy and you can close your doors if you're not wheeling well or you're a little bit annoyed, etc. But then you open out to your veranda, and your veranda looks out to another neighbour, not right that close, but far enough away that you can say hello and how are you feeling today, etc. So once again, you've got that interaction with your neighbour in a separate sort of courtyard where you start to create groups of connections with yours, because it's going to be over 200 people living there. So
Yes.
you'll get to know all of them, hopefully,
Yes.
by
Yes.
meeting the piazza. But when you actually live in this unit and that unit there, you start to create a closer friendship with some of your more closer groups.
And it does tie into, we were speaking off camera once when we were saying that, it does emulate that kind of Italian environment or that community environment where, you might have one of the residents, outside. They might be hanging their clothes or something, and then you might see someone across the other side of the yard, and then they might wave you over for a cup of coffee. So you told me that was
Exactly.
I thought that was a really beautiful part of that design and thinking as well. Now, we are obviously an age-in-place model, meaning that our residents will be able to continue living in their own environment, in their own villas, with age and age gracefully in their own home. That's the whole point of Casa Mia. So from an architecture point of view and a design point of view, what do you think, how has that impacted your design decisions to enable the age in place at Casa Mia?
Michelle, we all get old. Thankfully.
Do we?
Some of us, unfortunately, don't, but we all get old. And it is at the back of our minds when we're designing things to make sure that, yes, I'm very able at the moment and I can run from here to there quite easily and I can walk up steps.
Yes.
But we've incorporated, for example, there's no steps anywhere. Everything is flat as possible. And obviously we also realise that people one day are going to have a walker or in a wheelchair or something. So the corridors and everything are much wider. The doors into the units obviously are wider as well. And even the units themselves internally, they're not cluttered. We're trying to make them feel as open as we possibly can without sort of creating all these little passageways that you've got to weave your way around as an old person.
Yes, and that applies all to the piazza and the community centres as well. Everything is step-free. Yep, everything's on one level. Yep. Now, obviously, sustainability is a word that we hear thrown out a lot now as well. Was that a factor in the design choices as well?
Michelle, honestly, it's a catchphrase that's been thrown around. I don't know too many people know exactly what it actually means, but obviously we're very budget conscious about the materials that we used, and also trying to make sure that our buildings have sufficient overhangs to be able to create that shade to keep the sun off the walls, which keeps everything a little bit cooler.
Yes.
Orientation-wise, sometimes you're a little bit restricted with the site, etc., but most of the units are facing the right direction where you're getting the best outcome in terms of solar and breezes, etc., coming through. And materials, we've basically tried to get those that feel right at the end of the day, as opposed to just looking right. They've got to be things that people are going to use. The walking surfaces need to be something that's easy to traverse over the top and easy to keep clean as well.
Every project has its challenges. So with designing Casa Mia, were there any challenges or any humps that you have had to overcome so far in designing the project?
The biggest challenge is car parking.
Okay.
Unbelievably car parking. We all know that, we don't have that problem in small country towns because everybody just walks everywhere. But in this particular place, in Australia, we're all used to having our car.
And big cars too.
And big cars,
yes.
Exactly. And I'm probably going to want my car until I'm 90 or whatever. But and that's something we had to we wanted to get, because cars and people don't really mix, but you still want your car. So we've tried to design it in such a way that you've got reasonably good access to your car, which sits sort of over there. At the same time, what's more important is how you get from here to there, to there, to there, walking as a person.
Yes.
That's where you spend most of your time.
Yes.
So car parking was a challenge to make it fit because we didn't want it to create a big eyesore at the front as well with a vast car park of cars just sitting there.
Do you feel like, obviously we have had some changes recently as well with the plans, just in order to accommodate more car parking for all of our residents. Do you think that the design that we have now will be able to accommodate for everyone and have solved kind of that conundrum with the car parks that we've had?
I think it has, yes.
Yeah.
It's on the drawing board at the moment for that final stage on the western side, which is going to be most likely 2-storey to be able to get some car parking underneath.
Yep.
But let's see where the future goes. I mean, I don't think cars are going to be with us for very, but not in my lifetime, that's for sure.
Yes. Were there any other challenges or anything, any sort of hiccups that you came about?
I wouldn't say hiccups, but I think the challenges was that in my own mind, after I'd created that central piazza, and I knew that it had to be somewhere around about the middle of the site, was trying to somehow make it as inviting as possible. So what we came up with was that as you arrive at the front entry from the Porte Cochere, that we designed the central facilities building in such a way that it was, once again, I wouldn't say it's like a welcoming arm, but it's sort of the building itself is central, and then it's got these 2 wings that go out like that. Now, those wings don't go round like that, but what they create is that focal point from the entry right through the whole living area to the piazza. So when you arrive, you straight away get that lovely sense of feeling that you're coming into something that's nice and open, into something welcoming, sort of drawing your eye down to that central piazza.
I'm sure that'll be a big highlight for our residents once they're there.
So I've been into a few nursing homes, and this one's not a nursing home, but they're sort of senior livings and things, places where you come into the reception and that's all you see. You don't know where you're going. There's nothing to sort of welcome you into the facility.
Yes, so that was an important part
that
for you to
was
make it welcoming.
Important aspect of the place, to make it feel like you're coming into a community as opposed to just coming into a building.
Yes.
You can see life happening around there.
Yes, yes. Well, speaking of design elements, are there any other particular design elements that you're proud of, that you're particularly proud of?
Proud is very egoistic. I try not to be like that.
That you designed without, it came out better than you initially thought, maybe.
I thought
unexpected.
I think the part that that's really nice is when you're creating these units, and obviously for economics, you can't just have single story, and that you have to have units back to back. So it creates a corridor, and to me, a corridor represents a institutional look. You start to have all your grab rails because you're old. Well, we didn't want any of that. So in designing the units, we purposely didn't make the corridors parallel. We actually widened them out. So they're widened out to as you come in, as they get wider into. Then in the middle, we created a break in the units as well, so you're getting light coming in, and then the corridor came like change directions again. So you don't have the straight sort of linear institutional look in your corridors, and I think that's worked out really well. And the way we've designed the roofs, that the roof over that corridor, let's call it a corridor because it is a walkway corridor, it's actually separated from the roof, so you're getting light and ventilation coming in from the sides as well, so it feels like an outdoor pergolid area as you're wandering through to your units.
I actually do get asked about the hallways and the corridors quite a lot. Yes, but you're right in that it does. It can add a lot of character to a village. It can also take away from a lot, like you said. Depending on if it's barren, then it sort of makes you feel like you're not sure where you are, and even looking at hotels, they're all so different in how they do their corridors and hallways, and it makes such a big impact into. And, we will have residents walking to and from these hallways every day. So that's a big part of it.
I think from now on, probably shouldn't call them corridors. I actually see them more as little streets. Because we're playing around at the moment. We're exploring, not playing. We're exploring. Architects don't play. We explore how we can make that corridor street feel like a street. So we're looking at textures on the floor. And obviously the units themselves they're not just a continuous wall, they go in and out as well. So we're creating that same village feel walking down the street. Where in Europe sometimes some of those little streets are probably about that wide.
Yes.
So and it's creating that little laneway effect. So we're looking at different colours and different textures to sort of break down that institutional corridor look.
Yes, inspired by the sort of the streets of Italy and yes, which is beautiful. Obviously, cobblestone streets are probably not going to be something that we'll be exploring, but okay. And in terms of the residents' comfort and their well-being, what sort of what sort of elements have you sort of played with there to ensure their comfort and well-being while they're living there?
The units themselves are nothing like the old hilltop towns inside. They're as modern can be. They've got all the latest appliances and all the tapware and door furniture and everything like that. All the finishes are perfect, etc. So when you go into there, you do feel like you're in 2023. You're not looking back in 1823, etc.
Yes, of course.
So
yes.
it's current and it's very livable, very livable.
Yes, and all the little things like the dishwashers, drawer types, and then and then
all the ovens are at a certain height.
Lots of drawers in the kitchens. Yes, very important for the comfort of our residents. And even just in terms of colourings and the look in general, what sort of design elements did you have already answered this a little bit, but are there any other design elements that you've thought about with the residents in mind in terms of what you thought that they would be quite drawn to in terms of colour choices, materials, that sort of thing?
Inside the actual units, we've left the palette really quite neutral and leaving it up to the residents themselves, excuse me, to actually add their little bits, their flavour to it in terms of pillowcases and the colours and paintings on the wall.
Yes.
Which will sort of give it that personal homey look.
And make it their own home.
Make it their own home. Elsewhere on the exterior of the building, we are looking at various ranges of textures and finishes and various colours. The one thing we certainly don't want is to paint every unit the same colour. We are looking at breaking it down into each of the units. So my unit might be red, yours is green, and the other one's yellow. Not those sort of colours, of course, but more of those earthy colours as well.
Is there a particular design element in the village that you find... we talked about the piazza already, but is there anywhere that you find is particularly meaningful for you?
Meaningful for me, I think, was really lovely the way, for example, I'm going to go back to the piazza. We do have a little cafe, convenience store in there, and we're looking for a name. And I think Ross hit the nail on the head when he decided to call it Rosie's after his sister. So that I think is a lovely little touch, and I think there's got to be more of those sort of little things in there. Not exactly for a person, but something that sort of ties it in, has a little bit of a story to it.
Yeah, it certainly does have a story, being a family business. Which is beautiful, and everyone is local as well. Everyone that is on the building project, from the builders to yourself, everyone on the project is local as much as possible. So I think that's going to really bring it a lot of heart and soul into the village as well.
The other thing that Ross and I talked about, and we haven't put it in the plans yet, is that we are going to be building a pizza oven in the piazza. And that's something that I've already built 3 of them for myself.
Oh, wow.
And it's something that I'm going to be adding to that. I'd like to build that one there with Ross.
Yes.
So once again, there's that little bit of connection and story. And then obviously, you start to give lessons to some of the people that are interested in learning how to make pizza or even bread.
Yes.
Then the chef can actually start making homemade bread in the pizza oven, which they then use in the restaurant.
Yes.
As well. So it's that sort of community, once again, really getting your hands involved, getting hands-on involvement.
Yes. I've also read that doing things with your hands actually is good for the brain, and
it's good for a lot
creating
of
things with your hands and doing things
and
with your
talking,
hands is...
of course.
Yes. Oh, yes, of course.
Yes.
Is this the first retirement village that you've worked on? Have you worked for anything like this before?
I have worked on a couple of other ones for Aboriginals communities.
Yes.
Not to this extent, but one up in Emerald Creek.
Yes.
And another one here in Cairns called Digimeta. It was more of a hostel, but it was for ageing people as well.
Okay. Yeah.
And lo and behold, it also did have a sort of a piazza central area, but it was much bigger. It was a different culture, of course,
Did you do any research in how others in Australia or even overseas were doing retirement homes, or did you sort of just start from scratch and have, what was your design process like?
No, there was a lot of research done. I didn't actually go around to see any in Australia. I think Ross and Paul travelled to a few and came back with a few ideas and sort of things. Let's make sure we don't do this. It was more about let's not do this because it just doesnn't work. It's, and I thought, well, that's fairly obvious, of course, but it wasn't obvious down there for whatever reason.
Yes.
So yes, there was a fair bit of research done. But then I think at the end of the day, you look at the research. In terms of research, you look at your own community once again. You look at my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and all the other people that really are. You look at how they live or how they would like to live and what they do, and you sort of bring those ideas into how you design things.
Wow. And having now worked on this project, where do you think, to your knowledge, where do you think the future of retirement villages or seniors living communities would go from here? Do you think that this would be a new standard, this in terms of a design element? Do you think this would be a new standard? Do you think that this is what we're doing here is kind of the way forward? How do you think we sort of sit in the marketplace, and where do you think we'll go from here in the industry?
Look, I think Casa Mia is certainly heading in the right direction, and I think there's going to be a lot of improvements along the way as we learn how people actually use what we think, how we thought they were going to use it. But at the end of the day, I think we're on the right track. Absolutely. I think if I go back one step as well, with social media and stuff, I think we're losing the younger generation. Even younger than yourself, they're losing that connectivity with people.
Yes.
And I think as they get older, they're going to realise that it's not good for them. So they have to come back to talking to people instead of text, how are you today? Just pick up the phone and say, how are you? Or go across the road and say, how are you? Come in and have a cup of tea. So I think people are going to realise that really is how you should be living your life. Not just as you get older, but even as from a younger age. I won't say the old days, but Australia really used to have a house with a front veranda and no fence out the front. Nowadays, we want our living area out the back. We want a fence out the front.
Yes.
And we don't want to see anybody. Our fences are 1,800 high instead of 900 high they used to be. So once again, we're sort of closing ourselves in too much.
Yes.
And losing that connectivity that as you get older, you realise you really need.
Yes.
And you yearn for it.
Yes.
I remember my mother, Marie, before she went into a nursing home, she'd always sit on, we did have a house with a front veranda, and she would always sit on the front veranda. And I'd say, Mum, what do you sit out there? And she says, I just like to watch the people walking past. And some would wave because they knew her, of course, but just to be able to see people.
Yeah, well, you're definitely right. I mean, I grew up mostly in the 90s, so I'm a little bit older, definitely, than the young generation. But, I also understand that. I mean, we grew up in a time without any fences. My dog would be at the neighbour's house. I would be at the neighbour's house. My brother would be at the other neighbour's house. My parents never knew where we were, but we just knew to come home at dinner time. Right. So that was the gathering place. Yeah. And it really does take a village, as they say, and that community drive is just more and more important as we get older.
So you know exactly what I've been saying.
Yes.
That's good. Yes.
Definitely. And what role do you think architecture design plays in shaping the future of senior living?
Our role, I think, is to make sure that what we do is actually going to work. We have to forget about this, it's got to look great. Yes, it's got to look fine, it's got to look great if possible, etc. But at the end of the day, its main purpose is to be able for people to live how they're supposed to live in that place. Like in architecture school, we had a saying which said, form follows function. So the function is the thing that's got to be right. The form comes after. So you've really got to start off and make sure you get the basic planning right. You can't design a house and have the bedroom there and the bathroom all the way, then you've got to go across the lounge to get to it, for example. There's simple little things like that you just have to get right. So as architects, I think we've got the right expertise and hopefully the right knowledge that we get the way the building works for life correct.
Definitely. Would you be able to share a message with our future residents of Casa Mia about what you would like them to know about the architectural design?
Okay. Probably not so much about the architectural design, but if I can just say one thing to everybody that's going to be living in Casa Mia is that I've tried to create this place where you can be yourself in your unit and watch TV if you like to watch a show, but then when you feel that you need to be able to interact with people, that you can either go out to your veranda into your little courtyard where you've got Joe and Jack and Juliana across the street, across the courtyard there, and have a bit of a yarn or go for a bit of a walk or do some gardening in your little courtyard, and then really try to use that central piazza to its fullest, because that's where I think you're going to get a lot of enjoyment. Really using that space with all your friends that you're going to be making in Casa Mia.
Oh, that's beautiful. Just before we finish up, is there anything else you'd like to add for our residents about what else they might like to look forward to at Casa Mia?
I think the thing to look forward to is once we've made the pizza oven, there will be an opening night of Ross and Michael making pizzas, etc. So it'll be a fantastic night, I'm sure, and I'm sure Michelle and Renee said we'll organise some dancing girls. Not those sort of dancing girls, but
entertainment of some
entertainment
sort.
Of some
Tasteful
sort
entertainment.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, definitely. Oh, thank you so much for your time with us today. I'm sure that all of your information is incredibly valuable for our future residents, and they have so much to look forward to coming into our village. Thank you.
Thank you.